everybody! It's me here with the channel, and we are going to talk about woodpeckers. So we got a few different things to cover. We got some news, we got some science, we got some crazy stories. So let's jump right into it. The first thing I want to show you is a little bit of news that came out last week in Science Advances. Okay, this is really cool, and it is about how woodpeckers have been using human-made structures like power lines and fences to help them forage for food. This is really cool because these are obviously novel objects in the landscape. They didn't exist 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so it's pretty neat to see that animals have adapted to take advantage of them. There's a couple of interesting things about this paper. One is they actually went back through a lot of old literature to try to understand when this behavior might have started. And there is one paper from 1968 where they talked about a pileated woodpecker that was foraging along a barbed wire fence. And then they also found another paper from 1974 talking about a red-bellied woodpecker using power lines to forage. So that told them, okay, it's been going on for at least 50 years or longer. And they wanted to know if it was expanding. And what's really interesting is they looked at all these different studies, but they also collected their own data. And they found that it is not just that woodpeckers are using these structures, but that they're changing their foraging behavior in response to the type of structure. So, for instance, they're using fences in a different way than they're using power lines. When they're using power lines, they're kind of hanging underneath the power lines and foraging along the wires. And when they're using the fences, they're more likely to be drumming on the fence and looking for insects that come out in response to that. Drumming, it's interesting because, well, the fence is, this new object in the landscape. But the other thing is that insect-eating birds like woodpeckers are actually a limiting factor for the spread of disease. So, for instance, white-throated woodpeckers in eastern North America eat the spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive species. And by eating the spotted lanternfly, they reduce the population of spotted lanternfly, which means that the spotted lanternfly can't spread as much and cause as many problems. So it is really interesting to think about how these birds are not only adapting to these human-made structures, but that we can take advantage of them and use them to our benefit as well, okay? So that's the first thing. The next thing I want to talk about is the downy woodpecker, which is one of my favorite woodpeckers because it's the smallest woodpecker in North America. They're only about 6 inches long, so they're about the size of a sparrow. It is hard to imagine something that small being able to drum on trees and make a bunch of noise. But they do! And there is a really cool paper that was published a few years ago by Animal Behavior that talks about how the drumming of the downy woodpecker changes depending on the size of the tree they re-drumming on. So it turns out that if you a small bird and you're trying to drum on a big tree, you have to drum faster to get the same amount of force as a larger bird drumming slower on a large tree. So what they did in this study is they had these birds in an aviary, and they recorded how fast they drummed on the side of the aviary, which was made out of concrete, and then they also put them into some forest enclosures. And they compared their drumming rate on small trees versus large trees. And what they found was that when they were drumming on the large trees, they drummed significantly faster than when they were drumming on smaller trees. Now, it's worth noting that trees aren't the only thing that woodpeckers drum on. Sometimes they drum on metal objects, they drum on telephone poles, they drum on fences. You've probably heard a woodpecker drumming on your house, and that's usually on wood siding, and sometimes they even drum on glass windows. And I saw this recently on Twitter where somebody posted a video of a woodpecker drumming on a window, and it sounded just like hammering. It was incredible. So, that makes sense. If you're a small bird and you're drumming on a big tree, you have to drum faster to get the same amount of force. But what doesn't make as much sense is why would a bird need to get the same amount of force? What is it about hammering on things that is so important? Well, it turns out that the hammering is part of how they find food. So woodpeckers are looking for insects inside of trees, and the hammering actually helps them find those insects. The insects inside the tree respond to the hammering, and in some cases, they will actually fly out of the tree and the woodpeckers can catch them. In other cases, the woodpeckers can actually hear the insects moving around inside the tree, and they can use that to guide their drilling. And then once they get through the bark of the tree, they can go in and eat the insects. This is actually really cool because it is an example of how animals can adapt to different types of trees. So for instance, if you're a woodpecker and you're looking for insects in a maple tree, you have to hammer on the maple tree differently than you would If you were looking for insects in a pine tree, that's because the insects inside the trees are responding differently, and the woodpeckers have evolved to be able to detect those differences and change their drumming accordingly. I mean, it's amazing to me that there is this back and forth between animals and their environment, where the insects are evolving to respond to the drumming, and the woodpeckers are evolving to be able to detect that drumming and find the food that they're really looking for. The next thing I want to talk about is how woodpeckers avoid getting concussions. Because if you've ever heard a woodpecker drumming on a tree, you know that they can make a ton of noise. And it's really surprising that their heads don't explode, but they have a number of adaptations that help them do that. One is that they have this ligament that connects their lower jaw to their skull, and that ligament is really stretchy. So when they're drumming, that ligament actually allows their lower jaw to move forward and backward, which helps absorb some of the shock. They also have a special adaptation to their eyes that helps protect them from the concussion. Their eyes actually pop back into their sockets when they're drumming. And finally, they have a special adaptation to their middle ear that helps protect them from hearing damage. So yeah, it's pretty incredible that these guys can do what they do without getting injured. And finally, I just wanted to share this one last story. There was a guy who was hiking in Sequoia National Park back in June. And while he was hiking, he saw a bear that had climbed up a tree. And then he saw a woodpecker trying to chase the bear out of the tree. He thought that was pretty funny, so he decided to record it. And as he was recording it, the bear started coming down the tree. And at some point, the bear realized that it was being recorded and started to come over and investigate. And when it did, it swatted the guy's phone out of his hand and broke it, and then it ran off. Now, this guy is pretty unlucky. I mean, bears are big and they re-strong and they do you want really like it when you try to film them. But it's also worth noting that this bear probably wasn't trying to break his phone. It was probably just swatting at him to try to get him away from the tree. I think if the bear had seen the woodpecker and the guy at the same time, it would have known that the guy was there to film it. I think the fact that it saw the woodpecker first and then came down the tree and then realized that there was a guy there probably just meant that it was trying to get away from the guy. I think the moral of this story is maybe, do UN try to film bears when they re-climbing trees? Especially if there's a woodpecker there too. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this woodpecker update. We could probably do more of these. These guys are just fascinating. If you want to learn more about woodpeckers or any of the other animals that we talked about today, I'll put links down in the description. As always, if you liked this video, please give us a like. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can go to our website. And we'll see you next time.